what really got me was there was a phrase, which I will not remember the details of, but the heart of the phrase was like, when you're engaging with another person, there is always a symbolic object that you are offering, so you don't have to engage with them direct.
Welcome to another episode of What It's Like to Be You. I am Josh Levine, your host. Today, my guest is a Type 5 named Jess. When I started the interview with Jess, actually right before I started the interview with Jess, I admitted to her that Type 5 is one of the types that I feel like I have a little bit more of a stereotype in my head, as opposed to a true, deep, textured understanding of what it really is like to be a 5. And so I asked her, what kinds of questions should I ask to pull out her own type structure? And in true type fashion, this is what she said.
That in itself is a really interesting question because of my type structure and everything around that. And also because it's not, how am I going to say this simply? I would normally be very withholding around that. I would never give someone the opportunity to know what they need to ask. Because if they haven't already figured it out, it's their problem.
Oh man, I love it.
Yeah. Which isn't very generous of me, but it's something that I've definitely noticed.
That response alone was really illustrative of what we sometimes refer to as the passion of the 5, which is avarice, which is not greed, but is really more of a withholding of the self. And despite saying that, Jess reassured me later that she was going to try to answer all of my questions from the deepest, most honest place she could find in herself, and she did a really good job of doing that. One of the things that this conversation also did was really pitted the social instinct's desire for connection with the Type 5 structure of wanting to be withdrawn and isolated and internal. And we explore that implicitly, I think, throughout the entire conversation, and at some points also explicitly. We also get into what it really means to experience fear towards the end of the conversation. That was fascinating, especially contrasting my own experience with fear and hers as a head type. I loved this conversation with Jess. It really blew open a few stereotypes that I had of 5 and challenged some assumptions that I had. So please welcome my friend Jess. Welcome everyone to another interview. I'm very excited to be with my new friend Jess, who wants to go by just Jess and no other qualifiers. Is that true?
Yeah. Well, I'm sure other qualifiers can emerge naturally.
A couple qualifiers are, one is you're an artist and researcher based off the internet.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And I'd love to hear you clarify what that means. And cool. Also,
what is it?
Yeah, actually you go. What does that mean?
Oh, what does it mean? Well, I guess the easiest thing is to say that like I don't have a physical location, like wherever, like what would it mean if I was like, oh yeah, I'm from Germany, and it's like, so what does that really mean about me? Nothing. But in terms of the internet, that's the place I've been the longest. I've been using it since I was literally a child, so that's where I feel most comfortable. Virtual space.
So you live on the internet. Yeah. And so one thing that I find fascinating, okay, actually just to frame this up, your type structure is social self-preservation, 5 with a 6 wing, 5 3/8 trifix. Yeah. And one thing that in contrast to myself as a 3, that I find just amazing and fascinating about 5s is the general desire for 5s not to be discovered at all. and you said that just right before we turned the camera on here, you basically were like, well, you could, for example, give people information about me, but I can't be found, for example, on the internet. What is? Yeah. Can you say about that?
I mean, if they find me, it's a gold star. It's like good sleuthing. But no, I mean, like, I'm not going to engage in social media any more than I have to get the information that I'm interested in. But someone was joking about it with me the other day because we're in a group chat together, and they were like, "Why haven't you friended me? I've sent you all these friend requests," and I was like, "I don't friend anyone. That's a dead space. Nothing's there. Like." What we're doing right now is as close as we can kind of get. And it's like, no offense, like you're super interesting. It's fine, but I'm not going to give you what you think you were looking for. So don't worry about it. just accept what's going on, and we don't have to overcomplicate it. Yeah.
Okay. Let's dig into one of the really fascinating core aspects of 5 here, which is So to set this up in a kind of pedagogical way, the passion of the five we talk about is avarice, which is an
Yeah.
antiquated word, and people typically associate it with greed these days, but that's not really what it is. In the Enneagram,
Yeah.
it's really about a kind of withholding of the self.
Mm.
And I would love to hear your take on it or what your texture is. My understanding is what I just said, and also a
Yeah.
sense of being internally so under resourced or
Mm.
so um, thin and separate or something like that, that I have to um, be very careful about any expenditure of energy or contact with the world.
Mm. Yeah.
That's my understanding of it. And does that track with you?
Right on. Hmm. Does it track with me? I think that when I when I consider avarice, um, so in my own experience of that, of like the limitations that I will consciously or unconsciously put on other human beings when it comes to engaging with me, I definitely feel the wall. I definitely feel the wall. And it took me a while to recognize that there was even a wall there. I thought for like longest time I felt like overexposed, and I was just like, fuck. I was like, oh, I gotta get away before realizing that there was already a wall. Um, I
That's interesting in and
One
of
of the ways
itself.
I
Yeah.
come again.
That's interesting in and of itself. And
Yeah,
I,
yeah, totally. Oh yeah, no, it was like kind of, yeah, because I guess when you feel so separate by default, you don't even notice that that's the oxygen you're breathing,
yeah,
because
and
it's
there's
kind of like,
possibly
yeah,
an instinctual thing there being social dominant
definitely.
as a five.
Yeah.
That's
Oh
that's
yeah,
an
yeah, yeah.
it paints an interesting contrast or intertension, like the desire to be available or connected to people through the social instincts and the internal
Yeah.
withdrawal of the five.
Yeah, completely. Because there's a sense of being a stranger in a strange land just by default, and just sort of like navigating and not really feeling. Use the word thin, and I don't know if I would use that. It would be more like um, not even sort of like a hungry ghost. You know what I mean? Like I can move through space and there's stuff that I want, but the material I'm made of and the material that the thing that is around me is made of are so different that I can't genuinely consume anything except in a kind of abstraction. So how am I trying to explain this? It's kind of like with engaging with other people. I mean, let's put it in that context. It's sort of like I if I can try and reach out to touch something, but like my hand can kind of go through it. But I can pick up on something, but it's not the entirety of the thing, or I can't get the entirety of the thing from it. And that's actually probably a little too abstract. Um, but in terms of the kind of the wallness and what it has felt like engaging with people, I have described it before, um, like when I'm with others, and I was lamenting this when it came to me as a vision at the first time. It's sort of like I feel like I've created this like amazing pleasure garden. You know what I mean? And it has everything that you would ever possibly want in a pleasure garden. It's just like really enjoyable. It's engaging. It's you know very I want to say like tactile. There's it's just pleasure, right? There's just whatever is there. It's like interesting, and you want to be in it. And there's some people there, and they're looking around. They're like, wow, I've never really engaged with this before. This is so interesting. Whatever, and any kind of like big, almost carnival-esque vibes, right? But I'm there within this garden of my own creation, and I'm like standing on a porch to a much larger sort of building construct, tower, whatever. And I'm like looking out, and I realize that everything is so in what I don't know, everything is so distracting or beautiful or engaging or cultivated in a way to entertain, I guess, that no one's even fucking noticing that there's a porch, let alone a front door, let alone a place to go inside. And I have a sense of like, at one point I would have referred to it as subtle, but there's not really a subtle resentment about it. It's a kind of, I don't even know if I have the word for it now that I'm trying to spit it out, but there's a kind of deep dissatisfaction with the inability of the other to recognize that they're in a garden, but the garden is not the limit of the space that has potential to engage with, and yet they don't see. And I can't show them more than anything that I've already shown them, and so it's disappointing. I find it very disappointing to engage with people, and I know I could tell them, but I can't make them understand. So, you know, either they're going to get it or they're not going to get it. And unfortunately, the majority of people don't get it. Some people get on the porch, but not very many. But yeah, so it's bittersweet is how I would describe it. Mm-hmm.
Wow, that was a really evocative portrait you just gave there. And
Yeah.
I mean, the dominant emotional theme that I'm sensing underneath it is a kind of loneliness or isolation. And does that word land, or is that something that you're in contact with, or how do you?
Yeah. I mean, I think it does, because I had a physical wince at the concept of it. But it's not a comfortable word at all. And I think it's because it feels incompetent to be someone who knows how to be engaging and yet has an underlying sense of like, it's just not working. You know what I mean? So it's like I can try and I can learn tactics and whatever, but yet something doesn't always click so easily. And it's like, oh, and you know, the default is to be like, well, that's a them problem. And it is a them problem, but it's also a little bit of my problem. I say a little bit. So it can be a challenge, definitely. But yeah, it's just like, this isn't my design. but it is as it is, and so you have to kind of face it exactly as it emerges. Otherwise, it's a total delusion. So
yeah, let's let's see. I'm feeling almost like so abstract in this headspace right now. With this metaphor, and I want to get grounded in the very almost like physical reality of you being a 5.
Yeah, totes.
And I would love to, maybe let's just start with, can you share how you discovered the Enneagram, and then how you discovered you were a 5, and what it was specifically, if you remember, that stood out to you that you were like, oh yeah, this is the one that's me?
Yeah. I discovered the Enneagram when I was an adolescent. So I was probably around 13, and it was recommended to me on a forum that I was on the internet, unsurprisingly, for writing, etc. And I approached it at the beginning as a way of potentially unlocking understanding I didn't have at the time on the motivations and patterns of other people. So it was a kind of fence post where I could run wire in between and be like, oh, okay, this is the parameters of this thing which I'm currently engaging in.
Yeah.
And then I started applying it to myself. And of course, you know, as a delusional adolescent, I was like, I'm probably a 7. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I like to avoid things that I don't like. Whatever. Yeah, no, that applies. Blah blah blah. But I didn't really have a very mature or experienced perspective, and I didn't necessarily have a whole lot of sources, both in terms of texts and in terms of actually engaging with other human beings, let alone other human beings who knew what they were doing, as it were. So yeah, I think I had the big orange personality type books from
Don Riso and Russ Hudson.
Yeah, and so I read that a lot, but I was reading it and I wasn't necessarily reading people. In terms of being typed as a 5, I was like, yeah, fuck it. Yeah, no, I'll do a stupid video. What do I give a shit about? Like, blah, blah, blah. I'm bored. And I assumed that I would come out as a 7 wing 6 7 3 1. And no, Emeka got in contact with me and was like, yeah, you're a 5. I was like, no, that's not right. That doesn't make any sense. I'm so much. How could I possibly be that? And then I realized, like, no, fuck. It was what really got me was there was a phrase, which I will not remember the details of, but the heart of the phrase was like, when you're engaging with another person, there is always a symbolic object that you are offering, so you don't have to engage with them direct. And I was like, oh no, oh no, someone has like expressed what I did not want to express and I did not want exposed. I
Wow.
did not want anyone to break through this smoke and mirror, 3-ring shit show circus that I've been producing behind the scenes for so long. Um, so yeah, it
That's
was intense. It was
that's an
intense.
amazing statement
Yeah,
there. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It was a lot. But it was like, oh, great! Now everyone will fucking know. I was like, no, I don't want that. Um, yeah. So it was intense. It was really
Right.
intense.
And
But
then can
yeah,
you so that there's so much about that. So first so this idea of you're offering a symbolic object
yeah, yeah.
as a way to keep your inner distance but still have something in front of you that is the the location of the interaction or an anchor points or something like that.
I wouldn't use the word location, because that, well, maybe location, it sort of works in the context. Um, I think the way that I would frame it is this. Um, if I'm going in, if I know, like, okay, I'm going to engage another human, sort of like one engages combat. If I go in, I'm like, okay, well, I'm already aware that this person probably doesn't have the language on whatever level to see me, and I can see them, but I know something will be lost. They're not really going to see,
Mm-hmm.
and they're not really going to give me the kind of hit of the thing, the sweet whatever that I'm looking for.
Yeah.
But if I'm able to go to a place with them and bring something that we both understand within this kind of symbolic order, so I'm trying to turn it into something material, and I've got a tangent which I'll say for afterwards. But if I can bring this, and we can both sort of be with this thing, and we can talk about this thing, and we can uh, conceptualize this thing. Maybe we can change this thing together. Maybe we can play around with it. We can make something new. We can crush it. We can destroy it. Whatever. It doesn't really
Mm-hmm.
matter what the engagement is. But then maybe that's almost like as if we were doing something direct. So it's like a mitigating third thing, which
Yeah.
allows this to happen.
Right. So yeah, I have a question for you.
Yeah, go for it.
Um, the 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 elaborate garden metaphor that we started
Mm,
this conversation with,
yeah.
is that an example of a symbolic object that you placed in
Oh,
between us?
well, maybe. Is that an example of, that I placed between us? Kind of, because I know that, I assume rather, that the both of us fucking understand what a pleasure garden is, for lack of a better term. Um, and it's a way of,
Yeah, who doesn't
of,
understand what a pleasure garden is?
yeah, I know, right? Like,
So-
oh my god, it would be so, droll. But yeah, so kind of, but it could be anything. It could be a book, it could be a painting, it could be going out and looking at some kind of object, it could be producing a performance together, it could be talking about a poem, it could be any of these kind of external things. So um so like, say I want to see someone who I'm attracted to, and I want to engage them, and I want to uh, I want to invite them, past the porch. It could be like, oh, well, let's go to this exhibit that I know that this person is interested in. Um, and then through that, we can have a kind of linguistic dance. Is that really the phrase I'm going to use? Um, where in examining whatever symbolic object is there that we've agreed to examine, we actually see facets of ourselves within
Mhm.
that and reflected. So my unspoken hope, which is, now that I know I'm just about to say it out loud, is like kind of excruciating to admit, is that someone will be able to pick up something about me based on what I'm bringing them, and it will resonate with them in a way where they will realize that everything that we actually engage with is symbolic, and there's something else behind that, and that maybe they'll release whatever it is that is keeping them from it. And of course, it's, their fault. It's nothing to do with me. Or they'll see that they have the kind of key that unlocks the door, and will be able to both have that mitigated third thing and then the thing which is here.
So it seems like you have a kind of hidden intellectual agenda or something like that.
Duh. Yeah, definitely. Continue. I will always talk.
To dismantle or dissolve their cerebral sphere, or however they've oriented to the world. And in that dissolution is a kind of connection, or just intellectual awakening that you're hoping to invite them into and then share in?
I would say that it's even past the intellect. It's to a thing which is like kind of beyond language. So it's like beyond, it's kind of like acknowledging also that that's bullshit as well. Yeah. But there's something, there's some fucking magical thing somewhere, and I know it. I know it so much that I don't have a word for it, because it's beyond that. And if we can get to that, amazing. But I over-focus. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. The intellectual agenda thing that you're talking about, and the reason I chose those words is it's interesting how you can draw a very clear line between that, and then when we talk about sort of the average or unhealthy states of five, how fives are provocative and want to show other people that, how dumb they are for not seeing X, Y, or Z. And I'm not necessarily seeing that from you, but there is a sense of how an intellectual agenda can get distorted into that.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely moments in time where I have acted like a rabid dog against other people who have offended me in some way. And I'm like, I'm going to fucking tear you apart because XYZ. It's not my proudest moments at all. And I'm a lot less aggressive than I used to be.
We've all got
Yeah. Come again?
We've all got moments. We've all had moments.
Yeah. Everyone's evil. Don't forget that.
One other thing real quick to pull out of that whole story is there's a way that you're really, it seems like you're seeking connection through the mind.
Definitely.
And just to paint a contrast, I mean, the way that I experience connection, and we're both social self-pres types here, but there's a way that, and this is probably, I mean, it is coming from a 3 perspective, but it's like,
excellent.
I could kind of, it doesn't really matter what the content of our connection is, as long as there's depth to it and it meets some unspoken set of, I don't know what criteria that we're both kind of resonating with. But it could happen at a body level. It could happen just through eye contact. It could happen through just like an unspoken understanding of what's going on in the room. It could happen because we both like a book. It could happen because sort of any number of things. But this is me also as a Bermuda type, like the fluidity of what is acceptable to me in terms of the connection. But there seems to be a very specific thing that you're looking for. It's like you sort of present, here's this thing we're going to look at, and there's a bit of a test in it, like, can you hang? And then also like, how much are you willing to incorporate this into your worldview? Or how much are you going to allow this dissolve your worldview, or like actually form here's another way to put it. It's like you put this wormhole up into space between two people, the two of you, and it's like you're both gonna kind of go through this portal to meet each other, or something like that.
Yeah. I think it's sort of like, can you withstand this? Like, are you really there?
I'm also hearing some of the 8 fix too, but this is interesting too. 5 and 8 together, like a double rejection fix.
Yeah, definitely. Lots of rejection vibes. Because I'll go into every kind of assumption being like they won't, but I might as well fuck around and find out. You know what I mean? Like let's see what happens. Let's experiment. Let's figure it out. I think it's interesting what you said about the body stuff, because since the event that is limited physical engagement with other human beings, I've noticed that I find it that there is something haptic, there is something physical, there is something about being present in the same actual material location with another human being where something is happening, and without it I feel quite lost. So using screens to engage with other people just sort of sends me away to like deeper virtual fantasy. I find it incredibly unsatisfying, and very difficult to read, even if it's mostly unconscious. Read another human being. Very difficult to know if we're actually engaged. Impossible to know what's really happening between us. And that kind of, what I've noticed is that kind of baseline hunger is not something that I can replicate through this kind of medium, or through even just writing to another person or something like that. Like it's all fantasy until I'm actually in the room with another person, and where we have that eye contact, we have that smell, we have that feeling of absence of space between bodies, if that makes any sense.
It
So
definitely makes sense.
Yeah. And so that I've noticed a lot that drives me kind of nutso, because it's like, oh, well, I guess I don't need it. I do. I desperately. But like it's like, well, I'll not, and maybe it'll be fine. But it's not. It does something fucking weird to the brain. Like it's it ain't good. Like you actually need that. I'm realizing more through its complete absence for a while, and I'm slowly getting back into it now. But now it's like sensory overload when you're around other human beings. I find 99.9% of everyone else is disgusting, and I find their like physical presence to be overwhelming, and the lack of something, there's something which I'm looking for and it's not there, and I'm like, oh no, and it's like
What
I
is
can
that?
replicate. Exactly, what is it? It's something. I don't know if I have a word for it. It's the vibe, it's the thing, um it's the moment when you look at someone and it's like ding, but nothing has changed, and yet something on like an intrinsic level is like a spark, I guess.
Yeah.
But I feel like uh like lost in a desert. I can be in the middle of like hundreds of people, and they're people who are technically attractive or technically interesting or whatever, and I'm just like, oh, nothing's going on. And then if I see that one person who I'm like, huh, it's like prey drive, for lack of a better word, and it's like, what do I have to create in order, for lack of a better word, to like sort of not just to reel or trick that person to engage, but it's like, oh, some that's where my attention is focused. Everyone else might as well be dead. I want to know about that person, and I want them. Do I want them to know about me? Yeah, kind of. But I want something from them, and I want it. So it doesn't matter, and I'll do whatever. I'm most creative also when I have that going, where I can be like, ooh, what is this? How can I razzle dazzle? Like what can I make? Which, because I'm making it in proximity to this other, is sort of, I'm not really making it, I'm a channel for it, and then something new happens and I'm like, I could have never expected this. And that's like that's the thing that I want, is the what the fuck is this, like I don't know. But that's the true desire, if I'm gonna get all fucking hyped about it and shit like that. But yeah, that's where I'm at.
This is really fascinating to me. I want to make one commentary
Go
point,
for
and
it.
then I have a question. As you were talking about the not being physically proximate to people during COVID, and the sickness or the frustration of that, and the missing of actually human contact. That's an interesting contrast to me of
Totally.
those two things.
It was a surprise.
Yeah, it's surprising to me too. I mean, even in this
Yeah.
conversation, because it's contradicts a pretty frequent 5 stereotype of just wanting to be alone.
Oh,
And
don't get me wrong though. I'm alone
yeah,
99.9% of all the time. And that's where I feel great. But I know when I want the thing, which I sort of maybe just described, I don't even fucking know. It's like, I have to
yeah,
go out, and I don't want to at all. I would love for the virtual satisfaction to hit, but it's just not the real thing. And so the real thing is really important. But it was only until I was, in like fucking lockdown for months and stuff like that. And I had none of like my little micro fixes of like, oh, I can dip out. Oh, I can dip out. I can dip back in and out. And there was just nothing that, and it was a very stark realization. It was like, oh no, I like need this thing I thought I didn't, and it's horrible. And then when I've started obviously to go out and engage with people more often, it's like, I need this thing, and I'm in it, and it's not even here, and I hate everyone, and they're so disgusting and very dumb, and no one is resonating. And so where is it? I was like, well, I could go back into my into my simulation of it, but it's still, I'm left with a feeling on both sides of like, it's not there and it's not here, but maybe there's something else, and I can find it somewhere, but something needs to change, and I don't know what it is yet. I'm working it out. Maybe.
yeah.
But yeah. Or not. And I'll just go crazy and be a little goblin woman for the rest of forever, but we'll see.
I'm tuning into a couple of things about you that I'm really curious about from the point of view of just understanding how it fits within fiveness.
Yeah.
Your energy has a quality or certain like accents of fuck it energy, like you have like the fuck it, I'm going to just go after this. Or like when you sense that you need something or want something, you sort of fuck it, I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
And I guess maybe I'm rationalizing that with 2 assertive fixes underpinning the 5, but there's something very interesting to me going on with you about like you have very clearly this salient cerebral quality, like your even just what comes out of your mouth has a symbolic, quality. And it's like you're kind of figuring it out in real time almost. It's like, I ask you a question and it lands in your consciousness as a plaything to like turn around and
all it is play
in the moment. Yeah. But there's like a just fascinating like whimsy and lack of seriousness or something. And at least as I'm experiencing it in terms of your presentation. Totally. And I just like, how does all that land with you? Everything that I just said.
Super interesting. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. And I think it's definitely valid in the way that I present to other people, but I also know that there's another side of the stone which remains buried.
Okay.
And so in the moments when I'm not aware of, in the moments that I know that I am just with myself, it's a different energy. I still have a lot of fuck it energy, like fuck it. Like, what does it matter? Because it's all, because I all kind of consider it a little bit of a simulation. It doesn't really matter to me. It doesn't. But then there are things that matter so much that they're rarely going to come to the surface. They're like, ooh, those are. I guess that's where avarice comes in. It's like, no one's going to see that. That's mine, and they're my problems, and I want them, and no one else is allowed to touch them because they're mine, and I do not want anyone to engage with that. Not because of I don't even really know why. Not just because they're messy, but they are very, very messy. But it's like mine. And so it's like, I know they will not understand them. I know they'll attempt to give me something which has nothing to do with me. And it's like, I don't want that extra bullshit stuff on me. I don't want someone's interpretation of like the things that I'm concerned about or the things that I take very seriously, because it's like, you've got nothing to do with this. This is mine. this is like, so it's like, why are you wasting your time? And you're definitely wasting my time by trying to interpret something which you don't get, you know what I mean? So in that sense, it's very private. And a lot of, while I'm very responsive to like figuring out stuff and playing with it and moving around. It's also like, it's just playthings. So one of the things I wanted to actually bring up a little bit was I had listened through to the episode that you did with Emeka, and he was talking about like nothing is real until it's in physical space. Is that, would you say that's a fair analysis of what he was saying?
Let's see. How would I nuance that? Yeah, I mean, this whole thing of realness for him was all about like, if I can use it, if I can see it, if I can feel it, if I can experience it, that's what makes it real. Otherwise it's not.
What struck me as really funny with that is like, that's not how I engage. The only thing that really feels real is if it's mine, if I can engage with it, and if it's something which is malleable and I can like psychically adapt it to what I need it to be. And by adapt, I mean manipulate.
Yeah. What does it mean for something to be yours?
It's mine. That it's mine. What does it mean to be mine? I mean, I guess that it's being processed in the information processing center of the interior. That I have, I've cultivated it. It's emerged from me, even if it's not mine. I'm like a conduit for this information, which has come about, fully formed or in pieces. It doesn't really matter. And then I have been able to kind of structure it to my own design, let's say, maybe.
Okay. Yep.
But there's so much play that goes into that, because it's like, and I use the word play because it's so satisfying to be like, oh, here's a thing, here's a concept, here's a thing, and like I get to unpick it and play with it and move around with it, and it doesn't matter. What matters is the actual fidgeting around with it. It doesn't really matter if it is applicable in the outside, never, but it doesn't really matter even if it's like true or real. It's like, ooh, but this was, I've just fucking around. Like this is the part which is cool. And like, it might be applicable to my life, or I might be able to create something from it. But if it's clicking and sending off some kind of internal sparks, that's when it's like, wonderful, like to be a robot about it.
This word matter is like really resonating with me in some way. It's like this distinguishing between what doesn't matter and what does matter. And it feels like there's so much, I'm using this word neutrally, kind of froth that could very easily spill out of you, or that is like play stuff that just it doesn't matter. Like, here's this thing, here's that thing, here's an insight, here's whatever, But fundamentally, the thing that matters is, I guess I'm curious how you describe it. The thing I'm tuning into is the quote unquote something that you every once in a while see that you want from someone else across the room.
Yeah,
or something.
totes.
That matters. Also, it matters that you get to. It's almost like the product or output of the inner tinkering doesn't matter as much as the tinkering itself. That the tinkering matters.
Completely. Yeah.
And what else? Or how am I on target here? Or what else matters?
I think that's interesting. Yeah. I think essentially what matters for me, the word I would use is autonomy, I guess. And I know that kind of through a mission, because when the conditions of my existence do not allow me to spend the majority of my time doing what I want, which is creating, let's say, or thinking or researching or consuming or learning. I feel like those are all the same words now that I've said them out loud. I go insane. I go absolutely insane. Nothing feels real at all. And it's kind of like, what is full stop? But it's like, what is the purpose? If I'm not extruding information and creating something through just existing and moving through space, if I am not in a position where I can do that, it's like, well, what's there is no purpose. Like, it's sort of like I would ruin my own life, whatever that means, if it meant that in that ruin, even if it was a very small period of ruin, I got to do the thing that I want, which feels important to me, which is to process and create, and then maybe occasionally like attempt to engage another person to be like, just see, do you see? Like, do you? Probably don't, but like I'm gonna try anyway. Yeah, if I don't have the ability to yeah, to sort of engage and do that, yeah, I would ruin it just to do that for like 5 minutes, even if it meant throwing everything else away, which is, I realize, not the most logical thing to do. It's not very rational, but this is mine, so I get to do what I like with it. And if I want to spoil existence for some satisfaction, I can do that. I'm okay with it. But yeah, yeah.
I have a question that's going to sound abstract.
Go for it.
Yeah. How do you, or where do you locate yourself internally? Let me frame that slightly differently, or with more texture.
Yeah, go for it.
As I'm speaking with you, just in this conversation, I noticed that it's like, in order to hang in the conversation, my actual physical experience of myself or of my location is like moving upwards in my body, or like starting to move out here in my head or something. It's like, and I'm playing in this space with you and following your words, but then when I take a breath, I'm like, oh wait, yeah, that's right, I also exist here in this body, in this chair. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
In the physical world.
Yeah.
And that, so maybe paint that as a polarity. And
Totes.
so there's the question. It's like, where do you typically find yourself located? And yeah,
that's a beautiful question. Thank you for asking that question, for grounding it back into material reality. I appreciate that. Because the answer is I'm like 3 feet above my own head at any moment in time, until it's kind of like, oh yeah. It used to be very horrifying when I realized I had what I would refer to as a meat suit that I had to like navigate around in this. It feels a little bit like putting on a protective like a diver's suit, or an astronaut or something like that. It's like, oh yeah, okay, and it's like just as clunky and like out of sync. Even though I also I'm super protective of it. So like if I know, to give an example of different states. So when I'm by myself, a lot of the time it's shifting all over the place, but typically like 3 feet or whatever, like over my head, I can move around in it, and I can feel like, oh, okay, like this is it. And it feels, this is embarrassing to say on one level, it feels super powerful. Like it feels great. Like I love, like I do weightlifting and other type things just because it's like, ooh yeah, like this is cool. But it's also a little bit novel. It's not so great when it's, you know, in other states of not greatness. But for an example, like if I'm moving through, if I know I have to get physically from location A to location B or whatever, and I'm going through a city or something like that, I'm very aware of the presence of my body and the pose that I'm taking, and the way that can be used to negate unwanted attention from other people. But it is, I feel like I'm no, what's the word? Not betraying, but raking myself over coals by even expressing this aloud. So
okay.
I cultivated this when I was a teenager, and it's still with me now. It's like a sense of like, I'm going to use the word prowling, and that sounds awful, just to give myself some judgment. But no, it's sort of like, I'm very aware of my body moving through space, and the way that it can both attract, because of the way I've decided to hold myself and move through, but also repel people at the same moment. And it feels quite good. It feels quite powerful most of the time. I kind of like it. I know that it's both offensive and defensive at the same time. Again, something to play around with. but it takes a lot of work when I'm by myself to sort of go back into it and just
Mm-hmm.
be with my body, not my body as a tool. So, not my body as an object to move my brain around, but my body as something which actually isn't separated from my mind. Is a lot of work to do that, very challenging. Ultimately, it will be satisfying, but the process of doing it uh, can be labyrinthian, let's say. It's like, oh shit, oh fuck, oh here I am. So yeah,
Yeah.
I hope that
Yeah.
answers it. I think
Yeah.
so.
It's well, let's see, where's my head going here?
Yeah.
Partly it's just your relationship with this mind body question that we're kind of
Yeah.
working with here is really interesting to me. And even for the very first thing we said in this call is that you live on the internet.
Oh yeah.
It's like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
you're the place you actually are in the world, actually in quotes, isn't as important as this place that you like. The internet's really much more. Let me say it this way.
Mm.
That's a sincere response from you. It seems to me like you live more on the internet than you do in the world.
Yeah. And the internet is just, again, it's a metaphorical
Yeah, yeah.
example for, something which is more virtual,
But it's right.
and
That's right. It's
untouchable.
symbolic space
Yeah.
versus physical space or something like
Yeah,
that.
totally,
Yeah,
totally. And
yeah,
that's
yeah,
completely valid. Uh,
yeah.
do I think that it's the most effective way to exist? No, definitely not. Is it a tactic that I use in order to engage? Yeah. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it needs a little work, like everything. Um, but yeah, yeah. So it's about bouncing back and forth. And I mean, like, even within the metaphor of it, the internet is also a physical location somewhere. It's just spread out all over the place. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Have
yeah.
you engaged in inner work, and what have you done, if so, and what's it
Yes.
like?
Ooh, lovely question. Thank you. Um, I have, well, I would say that all of my creative work is a external manifestation of inner work. I don't separate them at all. Everything that I have written or painted or produced or whatever is just a slight, I say a slight reflection as in like a tiny little through into that, where I'm like, okay, I can expose a little bit of this. But the way I've approached inner work predominantly is through dream work. So I spend an inordinate amount of time um, reflecting on my, well, the landscape of my dreams. Um, and I find that quite important. I have, I also have like a meditation practice, which has been going for a while, which goes on and off, but whatever. Again, it's the physicality of it makes it difficult to sustain, as opposed to dreaming, which is that's always going to happen. That's so it's the slightly easier path to go down into that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the no mind aspect of meditation, um, and the being able to sit with myself as nothing is incredibly helpful because it loosens this preoccupation that I have with this, 3 feet of intellectual nothing space. Um, and instead, I can sit with phenomena, so external things, without becoming too, well, I guess, judgmental or discerning of them. Like I can just quite literally just sit with them. So the overwhelm of everything becomes less overwhelming because it's without judgment. I'm not saying, oh, this is overwhelming in the moment. I'm just being like, this is happening. This is happening. This is happening.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have to do anything about it. I can
Mm-hmm.
do nothing. And I don't have to be in mind. I don't have to think about it. I can just exist within it. And that's cool. But yeah. So dream work, meditation, that kind of other reflection. I write for like an hour every day just on trying to get thoughts out so I don't have to think about them.
Wow,
But
an
it's,
hour a day.
yeah.
That's
Yeah, yeah. Oh,
significant.
I mean,
Yeah.
I do an hour of personal writing, and then Am I going to admit this? Yes, I'll probably do between like 4 and 14 hours of creative writing a day, depending on what I'm doing. And I say that just because I realize, yeah, I will neglect everything else just to create something. But it's for me. It's not really for anyone else. It's just for me. So yeah, I does that address it? Are we?
It does. Yeah.
All right, sweet.
Well, okay, I mean, there's so many threads to pull
I
at
know.
just because there's so much material here, but that sounds like something that's yours,
Mm,
and
mm. Yeah,
um,
totes.
the creative writing thing. And what's your art?
I That's a good question. Outside of creative writing, which I do, I am a painter. Um, in physical space, I do predominantly watercolor abstractions, funnily enough. And then virtually, I've started producing figurative sort of portraiture using digital medium,
Okay.
which is interesting and very challenging. I didn't know that I could draw people until I could draw people. And I feel like observing them for so long is there was something going on in like a background studio of my unconscious, which allowed me to do it because I don't have an interior visual eye. So when people say like, "Oh, visualize a beach," I don't I don't do that. I can conceptualize a beach as sort of sound
Interesting.
and a series of concepts, but I don't actually have an eye. So it was interesting to start doing figurative work. But I've also done a lot of performance and sort of um, moving image and theater based stuff, but that I haven't done that in a while for a number of reasons. So I focus mostly on visual arts and creative writing. So yeah.
Does your art have a thematic underpinning or something that you're trying to say?
uh, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yes, it does. Whether or not other people pick up on that is their problem. I don't
Right.
do
Yeah.
I don't do anything that doesn't also mean something else. So
Yeah.
um, yeah, so it's all about that. A lot of the painting that I was working on had a kind of um, underpinning of an alchemical process. Um, I won't get into the details because fucking I'll just swamp you with that information forever. Um, but I consider studio art, so physical painting, etc., to be an extension of inner work. So it's doing something which again I can't try as I may to plan for something. Actually putting it out onto a page will always be different than anything I can imagine in this abstracted intellectual sphere. So that in and of itself is to me very magical and very important. And yeah, it's the thing. Even if I neglect it, also all the time, um, it's having a conversation with myself, which I'm unable to have with myself unless I actually make something happen. So it's the moment between concept and conception. It's the that space in between, which is indescribable. But a vague imprint of it can be left in whatever creative output is comes about because of it. So yeah, it's the process.
The alchemy that you describe, or that
Mm.
alchemical, I don't
Yeah,
forget exactly your wording, but
yeah, yeah. Me too.
is that a, and you said you weren't going to bore me with the technical details, but I'm actually kind of curious about, could you give
Yeah.
like a minute or two on it, or what you mean?
Oh, um, I'm of the mind that yes, I just laughed at my own joke. I'm at the of the mind that there is always something going on behind the veil of my own consciousness, and I'm unaware of it until a decision on some level or another is made to touch it. And
Mm-hmm.
so if I'm not creating something, then some of the energy of the activity which is going on back there will potentially build up and never be released, and has the possibility of getting toxic or unfulfilled in whatever level, unless it is actually expressed in some way or another. And so, I mean, obviously, I attempt to do this through actual language, through speaking, but that it's never the same as when it is in another kind of more physical form. So a painting, a gesture, a performance, invitation to think about something, but to think about something not just with your forefront mind, but with the part of your mind which might otherwise not be so directly accessible.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to transform something about myself that I don't have language for by creating something real. Both conceptually real and physically real. So yeah.
At the risk of being too pedagogically boxy about the Enneagram,
Yeah.
it feels like that's a form of the 5 impulse for discovery pointed inward.
Oh,
And
yeah. Yeah.
the sense of, and actually what I'm really curious, we're going to talk about the heart space here in a second, or that's what I'm hoping to talk about that. How important is it that what you discover and then express is seen by someone?
That's a good question. Because my gut feeling is like not at all. It's not important. And to be honest, the majority of the work that I do isn't seen by anyone else. And it feels very comfortable for it not to be seen. But I have become more aware through doing work and through focus on the Enneagram that it's an essential part of me breaking out of habitual patterns which are not necessarily getting me the special thing that I think I want, which I know what I think I want is not the same thing as the thing that I really, whatever it is, want. And so part of the process that I'm going through, and I'm to be completely candid, I'm going through it even by expressing myself to you in this medium right now. Like this to me is a way of being like, okay, fuck it, I'll do it. Let's see what happens. And it feels super risky, but it's also like, who gives a like, do I really give a shit?
Yeah.
No. But yeah, part of that process is through not doing so much self-reflection or obsession with the idea I have of myself, but to be like, well, what if you were to offer something to another person? Could you withstand it not being understood and not getting the thing? Even if you're offering it with a kind of a feeling of like, ooh, maybe we'll share a secret, like, ooh, maybe. But even if we don't, it's kind of like, well, isn't it interesting to examine the not as well as the maybe? Does that resonate?
I'm following. I'm tracking. Yeah. So
again, I feel like, is any of this happening? What the fuck? But yeah.
Okay, internally I'm parsing out something that has to do with the something that you're wanting, which still feels like kind of, I mean, it has a lot of texture for me, but it's still not quite, I don't have high resolution definition on what that thing is, but it kind of feels directionally in the heart space. Like,
yeah,
that's something that you're wanting. But it also feels like you have a default willingness to just let it go. Like, well, if that something isn't available, it's like, well, whatever, Yeah. And that's, I mean, again, the boxy Enneagram thing, but it feels like that's partly a rejection worldview or assumption, like, well,
Yeah.
it'd be nice if this thing existed, but if it doesn't, it's not like um, I was really that hopeful for it anyway. Um,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, um,
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and so it kind of just sloughs off. But
Yeah.
there is this desire to be seen or to share something
Mm.
through your self-expression, and it
Yeah.
sounds to me like there's a very deep self intimacy that goes on
Oh yeah.
in your expressive process in your art, that
Completely.
when you get to share something, like even the idea of sharing a secret with someone, that's kind of that's intimate.
Oh, completely. And I think, there's so much secret investment within that level of intimacy, obviously, which I have with myself. I've uh, yeah, I almost want to
Hmm.
not say, but it's like I've only ever had myself. So it's the idea of being like, well, like like if I expose this kind of thing, there's so much risk there, because it's like this is important to me, and
Hmm.
if it's not recognized in the other, it's kind of like ew, because the importance that I've put in the other is so severed in that
Hmm.
sense. It's kind of like, so a lot of the frustration, et cetera, that I have with engaging with other people is like, it's like you don't even recognize how difficult it was for me. And it's like you're not even really, it's not even that you don't even want to see me, but it's like you can't, and that's insulting. And it's insulting to me because it's like, oh, I thought I saw something with you and I can see it, but you can't see me. And that's gross. Like
Hmm.
almost to be in a way, if I want to get defensive about it, is kind of like, oh, it's like it's like ew, like you don't get it. You're so gross. That's like
Hmm.
like how repulsive, like how you know shallow and lame, and just like are you even a person, like that kind of stuff. So it can be quite
Yeah.
dehuman dehumanizing of the other when
Yeah.
they're unable to, what
Right.
feels to me like, put in the effort to like try to discover something which is undiscoverable. So I know it's sort of like a uh I don't even want to say double-edged sword. It's like a trap. It's a little bit of a trap. So being able to sit with someone and be like, oh, okay, well maybe, even if there's nothing, maybe nothing is fine. And that's like,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And maybe this is pushing it, but even like almost the expectation that they will fail, the quote unquote
Oh
test.
yeah, yeah. But
Yeah.
again, I think there's something kind of funny about failure. So it's like, maybe something amusing will come from that. But yeah, yeah, yeah. I do have an expectation that the other people probably won't
Hmm.
get to it, and that's annoying. I'm trying to release that a little bit more, but I
Yeah.
don't know. If you look at the majority of people, it's like, oh, I don't want that. I don't want whatever that is.
Uh huh.
Um, but yeah, there's only so much self intimacy a person can have before it's like complete disconnection from the other.
Hmm.
And looking at my trifix or whatever, it's two rejection types snuggled up next to an attachment type. So
Hmm.
the three aspect in the middle um, is alienated further, let's say, by the rest of the structure. But
Sure.
I also feel like it's super strong um, in the way that I present, and the way that I navigate my own feelings.
Hmm.
Um, but I also, it sounds weird, I like three. I think it's cool.
Yeah.
like I think it's really interesting. Also, I feel like it's my tether to reality on one level, because it's always knows of the other. It cannot forget about the other.
Uh huh.
And there's this sort of thing that comes back to me. I'm not going to remember the words exactly, but it's speaking about like only through the gaze of the other can I see myself in totality, and that's something which is stuck with me because it feels intuitively true,
Hmm.
um, but it's not comfortable, and it's frustrating as hell, because it's like I don't want that. Like I want to just be. I just want to be. I just
Right.
I
Right.
me. Um, but it's the knowledge also. It's of that, like a thing becomes real when it's witnessed. And so, yeah, there's a lot of risk and a lot of reward, but it's not necessarily the most comfortable or straightforward.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah.
I just want to prompt you with an open-ended. We
Go
were
for
going
it.
to talk about the heart space in general, and I
Yeah.
was curious what else you wanted to share about that,
Yeah.
and then also maybe moving into like how what the Enneagram is and means for you.
Yeah. Um, the heart space is cool. Um, I, yeah, I knew like 6 years ago. I've known forever, but whatever. You know, I became more and more aware of my ability to sever any kind of like um, deep emotional meshment or resonance or like dance with other people like ages ago.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, oh no, that there's something wrong there. There's something really wrong. That doesn't feel that doesn't feel right for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And it's part of what led me back onto a path of reflection and inner work, which also led back into sort of Enneagram stuff to kind of contextualize it in a outside way rather than just me writing and speaking to myself. Um, but the of all of the things, I am probably most protective of heart, um, most protective of my feelings and my emotions, most controlled in the way that I would want to present them, which is I don't, and it's whatever. It's a process. Um, and I know the thin spectrum of what I have deemed acceptable, and then the vast swathe of things which I have decided are not as significant, even though I know and feel inside they're significant, but they're mine. And so part of the process that I have attempted to go through, and I could quite possibly fail, but that's part of it, is to be like, okay, well, how can I discover new ways of engaging authentically about what I am without an anxiety or a fear or a deep seated suspicion that other people will be not just disgusted, but also will quite actively use it as some kind of leverage against me. And so it's like, okay, well, how can I first off not think about it, but just like intuitively move with it? Um, and also like what's so bad? What's so bad about the rawness that's there? Because it's real and I know it. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
so does it matter if other people get to explore that as well? But
Mm-hmm.
I, again, it's like fucking so many hoops to jump through. So it's, yeah, up there in the tower past the porch and the pleasure garden. But yeah, so that's like a big challenge. But on the other hand, if I'm outside witnessing others, cool. Like I find it fascinating and like um, engaging. Sometimes overwhelming and very boring. Let's be real. Like there's like, ugh, that has nothing to do with me. Leave me alone. Like that's I don't give a shit. But if I can kind of let go of that dismissiveness, uh, human human beings are amazing. It's like, wow, everyone's got something going on. I might not always respect that or absorb it or be interested in it, but it's still there. Hopefully, unless someone's had like a weird soul death and they're like a complete void, and that's very terrifying. And so I think the terror of witnessing people who there's nothing, they've they have had a complete disconnect to some kind of magical inner thing. Um, they're like zombies. And that to me was so frightening. That was one of the reasons where it was like, okay, well, that's what I don't want to do. I don't want to become so fractured from expressing something which is real about myself that I turn into like a demon person. So that was, yeah, that's part of the motivation to give a shit just
Is that a
because,
yeah?
go on.
Is that a real fear?
Yeah.
Like
To
it's a
be a flat demonic unthinking kind of like cordyceps infected, non-reflective, like zombie. Oh, for real, for real, for real, for real. Just someone going through the motions, being like,
Uh-huh.
this is fine. Like, no, 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 girl. Like, no, thank you. That's
What
horrifying, actually.
I get
Yeah.
that that's horrifying, but partly my question is
Yeah.
that a salient fear for you? Like it comes up for you, and partly my question also has the a curiosity around fear in general and how that works for you
Yeah.
as a five, as a mental type in the fear
I'm
center, all that stuff.
on top level fear stuff. And excuse me if I suddenly die in terms of whatever. If
Mm.
I suddenly die talking about feelings. um, uh, on a top level, no. The fears that I'm preoccupied with are more to do with like, am I going to be inconvenienced in some kind of way by other human beings that I won't be able to do what I want? Like that's the top one where it's like, oh no, am I going to be
Mm-hmm.
drained of
Mm-hmm.
everything which I hold so dear, um, that I won't be able to do it? Like, oh no, I need to take action and navigate and shape and design my life so I can do what is most important to me.
Mm-hmm.
But on another level, the idea of shallowness, the idea of there being no depth or no ability to express that in a way which feels real to me is frightening. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but the kind of like dead-eyed zombification, um, that unreflective black mold mind, is horrifying on a deeper level. And I find it very frightening to engage with other people where there's no, you know, and so where there's no there. I find
Yeah.
that like, because I'm always so in my head or abstracted or whatever that
Yeah.
like when it's like, oh, maybe there is no reality. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like no. But yeah, yeah, yeah. Did that
Partly
address
okay.
it? Oh,
It did, yeah.
yeah,
And
sweet.
as a so my typing is 396, so head last,
Yeah,
and what I notice is I don't actually use or even relate to the word frightening very often.
interesting.
And and I noticed that it's a word and words like it in that same general
Yeah,
space of terrifying, horrifying, these kinds of things.
yeah,
That's it's present, it's available. Like you pluck those words out of your consciousness to describe
yeah,
something. It's describing a real inner experience, the
yeah,
fright of seeing that. And
yeah.
can you can you just talk about what that is? Like what does it mean to be frightened?
What it means to be frightened. Ooh, that's a really good question. I could think of how deep to go into it. Um, Interestingly, I get it on a physical level first,
Mm-hmm.
but then I get stuck in it on a conceptual level.
Okay.
So where it sticks is me going through like every iteration or absence of the non-frighteningness. Um, but it's funny also because I can flip it around and be like, fuck it. But when actual fear grips, it's like a mobilization on multiple levels.
Mm-hmm.
Physical immobilization, but like mental, like spinning and a kind of lashing out kind of thing, where it's like I can impulsively feel myself being like, I need to do anything other than be frightened, and I can never show that I'm frightened at all,
Mm-hmm.
um, for multiple reasons. Um, but yeah, and sometimes when you dip into the fright, that can be quite cool because it's kind of like, what's really going on here? Because what I seem to think that I'm frightened of is not really where the fear actually sits. So
Mm-hmm.
it can kind of be about weaving through what I assume the fear is and then what the actual body content of that fear is. But it's exhausting to have to move through all of those different threads and get to the crux of it. But it's ultimately satisfying because it's sort of like seeing the zipper on the back of a stage show monster. It's kind
Right.
of like, oh, okay, never mind. But to get through all of that sort of wiggly, twisted fear things is
Hmm.
hard, because a lot of those fears are to do, with image, or with uh, lack of resources, or my own incompetence, or
Hmm.
um, you know uh, being made overly vulnerable, and
Yeah.
exposed, and sort of ripped apart, like a whole bunch of vultures would rip apart like a half dying sheep or something like that. And it's like, oh no. Oh, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem fun. um but yeah, but in
And
my
well, just real quick, the risk of
yeah,
exposure, like
yeah,
you've also used the word risky a couple times in this
mm,
conversation, like, and
totally.
you've paused before you're about to say something, like, am I really going to say this? And then
Oh
you
yeah,
kind of, and that inner negotiation is working with or against that fear of, I might, if I expose myself, be ripped open by a bunch of vultures or something.
yeah,
Like, that's a metaphor, but that's viscerally
yeah,
what it feels like. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, it feels like you know like a thread would be pulled and everything would come apart at the seams.
Ah, there you go. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So it's it can be like that, but it's also, on a, again, I there's a kind of game that you can play with it, where it's sort of like, ooh, is it really like that though? What's it really like? What's really
Aha.
like, oh, is it really risky for me to say that? No,
Yeah.
not really. It's like, oh, what will happen if I do? What maybe it would be quite interesting if I just humiliate myself in front of all these people. Or like, oh,
Hmm.
maybe it
Hmm.
would be really interesting if I attempted to woo someone who I'm enamored with, and they reject me, and then for the rest of my life I just want to die. And it's like, well, I probably won't, but
Hmm.
maybe. And so I can turn it into something
Mm.
like a game. um, but it's when the game goes away where it becomes un, uh, untenable, or whatever. It becomes like, uh, oh yeah, I actually have to sit with that fear, and examine it for what it is outside of the impulse of like horror.
Hmm.
um, so yeah, it's probably like a, yeah, yeah. But the top level base fear is like, oh, if I have to do this, someone's gonna like just suck away all of my energy, and I won't be
Uh-huh.
able to do what I want. And then the other fear is kind of like, I will be actually pulled apart on like a intrinsic base level, and because of that, I won't be able to examine things and play around and create stuff, and I'll
Right.
just be a series of parts, like a decommissioned android or something like that. And it's like,
Yeah.
oh, I would like to be
Decommi-
functional.
yeah.
I would
And
like to be functional.
that's interesting. The decommissioned
Yeah.
android. I mean, it really is evocative of the other image, like the black mold mind,
Yeah.
vacant person.
Yeah. Oh,
Um,
yeah.
so just making that connection, like
Yeah. Yeah.
that. I mean, is that a stretch, or does that feel right to you? Like the sight of someone who is like that evokes,
Yeah.
like, this is what I might become,
Oh, totally. No, I can
or
see
something.
it. I can
Yeah.
I can see that connection there. And yeah, no, I don't want that at all. I want to I'd like to keep functioning. I'd like to, explore. But is, you know, is the event that would lead to being ripped apart or falling apart, whatever, even really real? Or is it a figment which is keeping me from some other thing that could be also interesting? I don't know. And
Hmm.
I won't really know until I'm actually there. So I'm
Yeah.
aware that the fears that arise are just ideas. And until we're
Yeah.
actually doing something, but still it's frightening. I don't want to do it. But the
Yeah.
novelty
Yeah.
of stuff lets me do things. So yeah.
So I don't mean to belabor this point, but this idea of the concept of a vapid, lifeless, black mold mind person
Yeah.
whose eyes are vacant, the zombified human being,
Yeah.
that that exists in your consciousness in a place that evokes
Yeah.
something really existentially horrifying, terrifying, frightening for you.
Yeah.
And and when you run into a person who somehow touches that, it it puts you in touch, it puts you in contact with that fear. So I get this, I get the, I get who you're talking about.
Mm,
You know what I
mm,
mean? Like,
yeah,
I
yeah. You've
know,
met him.
I
We all
know.
know
Yeah.
him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But my response to them is not terror or fright. I mean, there's maybe a repulsion or a
Yeah.
sense of just sadness for the person,
Oh.
or what might it be? I don't know, pity or like my forwarding might get activated. I might feel frustrated that I can't connect to this person or dismiss them outright or something like. But terror just doesn't come up.
That's amazing.
So that's
so
partly
cool.
why I'm so fascinated about this choice of words for you, or the experience of terror.
It's so cool to me that your response would be like pitying or sadness or something like that, because that's somewhere else for me. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
I'm not meeting them in that kind of space. First off, I'm kind of thinking about them, but I'm like, whoa, I got to get away from this. Like you would
Mm-hmm.
get away from literally a zombie. But it sort of feels, yeah, it feels fucking
Because
terrifying.
what? Because
Okay, yeah, I was nearly there. It feels
yeah.
terrifying because it feels a little bit like they're going to unknowingly, which is the grossest part, suck something away from me.
Uh-huh.
Um, and it won't even be recycled. It will just be, it'll just unknowingly be destroyed in like
Uh-huh.
true universal heat death style. So
Yeah.
there's no nothing that comes from it. There's
Mm-hmm.
no interconnection. It's just um, reckless, heartless consumption. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
and so if I'm around it, not only do I have the potential for becoming like them, um,
Uh-huh.
but it's like I wouldn't even know it, and it would just something would be drained away from me, and then I'd be left unknowingly like that. And also, it's scary just because I suppose on another level, having vaguely thought about it, um, it is sad. Um, and then physically, it's sort of well, I guess like a nothingness, but I guess it would show a vulnerability. But yeah, so that's part of the fear. I mean, there's so many fears. You could talk to someone about fears for like a week, I'm sure,
Mm-hmm.
a head type at least.
Yeah.
It's all fears all the way down. But yeah. Hmm.
What's this like for you to be the subject of extended curiosity and questioning in a
Ooh.
focused way for an hour and a half?
In action, um, fine. It's cool, interesting, weird. Couldn't assume what was going to happen until it actually happened, so that's cool.
Yeah.
Afterwards, I assume that I'll probably be exhausted. After, I'll just have to lay down and do fucking nothing and not talk to anyone for like 2.5 days. Um, but there's a there's a sense of um, personal risk in being able to be like, oh yeah, I'll just talk candidly about myself. But it's like, oh, I don't really like that. Normally, when I'm normally engaging with other people, I'm the one who's like, so, so like, tell me about your dreams. What's your relationship with your sister like? Just what I like, drill down, um, until I get to the point where I really want, where I'm like, give me that nugget of information. Um, so it feels weird to be questioned, but at the same time, there's a kind of lightness about it because it's like, this is this is only happening right now, and then it'll go, and then it'll be something else. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But it is interesting. So thank you for the opportunity for something interesting, and for me also, attempting to expose myself in ways which I wouldn't otherwise uh, normally leap at the chance to do. But I was like, why not?
Yeah. Well, thank you for doing this and
Yeah.
for being willing to expose yourself to the extent that you have.
You know me. Yeah, no, of course. Love exposing myself on the internet. It's definitely my top 5 favorite things to do.
Cool.
But
And you know
yeah, no,
that I'm going to release this and it's going to be under the name Jess. And then if
yeah,
anybody wants to find your art, they're going to
they
have to do
can
their own sleuthing. Yeah, that's right. Okay.
do the
So good luck to
sleuthing.
you. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm sure those who know, and those who don't. That's cool. But yeah, thank you so
Okay.
much. It was
Cool.
great. So
Yeah.
take
Thank you
care.
too.
Yeah, bye.
You too.